episode of the hit show Translating Love with your favorite hosts,
Dani
and Woifi.
But most importantly, Dani.
But most importantly, Woifi. The true hero and the unsung
Hero.
godlike figure of this podcast.
Oh.
People are raving about him and his sensitive, feminine, and glorious sides. But all this, his skinny body and his chicken legs. And his really, really blonde hair and blue eyes and nice beard and face and stuff.
Face.
We're back, everybody. And this time it's a new episode again.
As opposed to the last time.
Which was also another episode. I have to say...
What do you have to say?
I don't know. I really love doing the podcast, but I wish there would be an easy way to, promote us more, or an easy way to get us out more, because we have a following, but it's not massive, but it's decent. And it keeps growing so slowly because, we don't have the reach. We don't have the capacity online to, bring it out to people. And there's obviously no network behind us who puts money into promoting us. So we have to do it ourselves. And the only way we can do that is asking you guys, the people on the radio. In front of the radio.
But not maybe in front of their phones. Or...
In front of the phones or on their headphones. To share the podcast, to rate the podcast on Apple Podcast if you haven't done that yet. It takes 2 seconds.
And the fun thing about our podcast is that you don't have to listen to every episode. You can just listen to the ones that interest you. And it's really, really handy because all you have to do is look at the titles and it basically tells you what the episode is about.
Right. And also the description. We try to make it as descriptive as possible.
Really? It's descriptive in the description?
Yes, I try to. And I think that's like you can basically pick and say, okay, maybe I skipped this episode because I'm not interested. Maybe then we have a guest on that you're like, ooh, like the last episode we had Leonie on, and she's like a
nutrition coach.
And it was super insightful and interesting and just fun to talk to her and get a different perspective on food and healthy eating habits. Or when we had your friend on from the US who was talking about Black Lives Matter and
Brandon
and his like take on the whole movement and how he grew up and how he as a black man in America in a permanently like in a big white city more so sees life and how he perceives racism and stuff. Or Libby and her brother.
Leslie and her brother, Bradley.
Oh, Libby, every time. Leslie. And when they were talking about, their...
they were talking
like pronouns and gender and all that stuff that we had we had little idea of. So you can basically choose and say, oh, this episode might be for me. Or, hey, this episode might be something for a friend. So you can send the episode to someone. I'm just saying. But yeah,
but all of that long rant to say that sharing really does go a long way. Sharing is caring.
Right.
And if you like the podcast, then we would really, really appreciate it if you share it, even if it's just sharing in your Instagram stories, because people at least see that. Maybe they're like, ooh, what's that? Or like you said, just sharing it with a friend who might like that particular episode or whatever it might be. But it really does help us, and we would really appreciate it.
And with that, we can maybe, if we get bigger, we can maybe like invest in more equipment so you make the podcast sound better and maybe get more cooler guests on because they see, the podcast is pretty big, so we want to, hop on the podcast and talk a little bit about myself. And we ultimately can, be more motivated to bring you better episodes and better... No, we already tried that. But I have also recognized, it's, you record something, you talk to the microphone for 30 to 40 minutes and you have to come up with stuff and you be funny and shit or you have to try to sound interesting in a topic, even though you maybe have a headache or you had a shitty day. That's not always easy to do that. Or you have a
bruised tailbone.
Or that because you hurt yourself trying to skate again. Stuff like that, So if you feel like, oh, this episode wasn't as good, yeah, might be true because, we might not have been in the best mood to record it, but we still deliver and we try to bring the best.
This is a really weird rant that you're going on right now.
It is. I'm just trying to be open more about the process of making a podcast because it's work. It's work and we try to do our best. And I hope you people see that.
What do you mean by you people?
Yeah, the people who listen. I hope they appreciate us doing that as much as we appreciate them listening to it and giving us their time. Yeah. But let's go to the topic, and today we're talking about
finances.
Yay!
Which might sound like a boring topic, but I actually find it very interesting because
we had a topic about arguing about money.
Yes.
So that might be like a starter if you haven't listened to that. Go back to that, listen to that, and then come back to this one.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually really interesting because I would be willing to bet if you asked if you have a friend who's in a relationship, if you ask any of your friends in a relationship how often they talk with their partner about finances, I bet you they will say never. The majority.
I think up to a certain point where you maybe take a loan out for a house or a bigger project, you might not be necessarily be in a spot where you have to.
Although I think before then you should.
But, right. And also I think, maybe if you live together, you already talk about it a little bit. Maybe, hey, let's split rent like this. Or I pay this bill and you pay this bill. Or do it monthly where okay, maybe you pay this one this month and I pay this one. But yeah, I think most people probably didn't or don't.
Even with bill stuff, a lot of people don't talk about it. It's just assumed that everything is exactly 50-50 down the middle. That's just kind of the assumption when you move in with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But we can go into that either now or later, but talk about why maybe 50-50 is not
the 50-50
the best choice.
Discussion about finances is a tricky one because 50-50 doesn't mean we split the whole thing 50-50. You pay that's exact same amount as I pay.
Right.
And especially with women still being underpaid because they're just simply women. And most of the time in jobs where they just don't pay as much, even though they do more work even. It's not always possible for someone with with less income than the other person to pay as much. I think it's not fair.
You can look at it this way. I wrote out just a really simple, not equation, but just to some numbers to look at it this way. So if let's say that you make $3,000 a month, but your partner makes only $1,000. And I know those numbers are a little outrageous because not many people make $3,000 a month, but just go with me. So you make $3,000, your partner makes $1,000. Do you think it's fair then to say that the monthly payment of $1,000 for your rent would be 50-50 split down the middle? Because if it's that way, you would still have, so that means each person would pay $500. You would still have $2,500 to go towards savings or other monthly expenses, while your partner loses half their income, their monthly income.
Mm-hmm.
And they're only putting $500 towards savings or other monthly costs. So it could potentially be that just with groceries or with other bills and things, they're struggling just to make it through the month while you're feeling like you have a good nest egg, basically. So I think it's an interesting way to look at it because then you can say, oh, that does actually make sense. And then maybe we split it in a way that's I pay 75% of this and you pay 25 because then we're each then feeling a little more financially stable to get through the month until the next paycheck comes.
And with that, obviously, the discussion of a co-joint or a joint bank account for especially those expenses. Basically, a lot of people do it like this, where they put monthly money into a joint bank account for bills and stuff, but still have their separate accounts for savings and for stuff they want to invest in, which I think is a smart move because then you're still financially independent, but you have an overview of your monthly costs that you and your partner pay. And I think it's much easier to discuss about that because then both parties can look into that and see, okay, look, this is how much, blah, blah. And especially if you live together, I think that's a smart step towards, I mean, I wouldn't do it right at the beginning, but after like a couple of months living together and like splitting bills and stuff, that's something you can think about because I think it makes it easier to split money in a fair way, I would say.
Yeah. At the same time, I would say just on the other side of that, it's different for every couple. So obviously there is unfortunately no one right way to handle your finances in a relationship. There are many people who keep their finances completely separate, like we do.
Yeah, now we do.
We've talked about more like we'll maybe start to combine things once we have kids or things like that. But we've kept our finances separate, and there are a lot of people who do that, and it just works for them, and that's fine as long as you come to some sort of understanding about your budget and about what you can afford and what you can't afford. But I think just with that, what's really important is before you make any like big life changes or life decisions or financial decisions, that you talk about it thoroughly with your partner and be open about what you can afford and what you can't afford, and how you feel it's fair to split it up. And until you can come to some sort of logical decision together, you may want to rethink the whole thing unless you can come to that logical decision.
I think that's also a good point for like having someone in the relationship being the CFO for especially expenses that go.
That's Chief Financial Officer, for those of you who don't know what CFO is.
So basically someone who takes care of certain bills or takes care of the house stuff, everything that has to do with bill, with rent, with stuff like that. Someone who takes care of that. Because I think it's easier because then the other person then doesn't have to worry about that stuff. And also one person has an overview about the whole thing and can say, hey, look, this is how it looks right now. That's much saved because we, put too much in the blah, whatever.
And I think it also only works if you have a joint bank account because otherwise they would need access to your finances. Because otherwise they're paying for everything.
Obviously, but I think in terms of just overview, I think it's smart to have someone to have an overview of, okay, this is the monthly house cost, this is the bill for the electricity, this is the water bill, this is the bill for insurance, stuff like that. I think it's smart to have someone, and I think it doesn't have to be the man. I know a lot of relationships where it's the man, but I think it's why a woman can't do the same thing. But someone who has like a hand for that and just keeps an overview of like, okay, look, maybe that cost went down this month, or in general we went cheaper this month. Someone who keeps an eye on those things. I think that's a smart idea. And you also said things about getting something more expensive maybe, or wanting something that is maybe like a little out of the budget, whatever. I think a smart way to do that also is like you just keep it for 10 days or a little longer. And if you still want it that bad after 10 days, you can still discuss it again and say, look, we should buy that, or we should invest that because it would help us, or because I would need it, whatever, stuff like that. Because especially I think right now we're sitting at home a lot, we're looking online for shopping, and targeted ads are an easy way to spend money, and there's a lot of shit on the internet you might want to get, and spending a little too much money can get out of hand pretty fast on the internet. So having this system of like waiting a couple of days and then discussing it and say, okay, look, I really want that, or I really need that because of those reasons, is a smart way to do that before you buy something out of compulsion.
Yeah. I think it's also important to, and obviously it's not for everybody. Some people are just naturally really good at handling their money and making sure that they have enough at the end of the month or whatever it might be. But some people are just not as good at that. And I think it's also then important to make a budget, whether it's just for yourself or whether it's for the two of you as a couple or whatever it might be. But either way, if you combine your finances or you don't, you can basically make a list of everything that you need, and I mean need, on a regular basis. So like your rent bill, mortgage, car payments, insurance, groceries, things like that, necessities. And try to set aside amounts for each of those things. So make a budget, say, okay, I need this. And it takes a little experimenting. You might just have to track, okay, I spent this much this week on groceries and this much the next week on groceries. And you can make an average. Okay, I need at least this amount each week for groceries or each month for groceries.
Yeah.
And then like with your rent payments and your car payments. And then by the end of making this budget, you see, okay, this is how much money has to go out every month. And you can maybe say, okay, I can cut back a little here. I can, tweak this one a little bit. And then that's a really easy way to be able to save money as well, because then you can say, okay, this is the money that I need to spend. I want to then at least put this amount into savings, and then I can give myself a little bit of a wiggle room for extra things.
There are cool apps who basically do that, where you can put in the numbers, and it just gives you a really cool overview and statistics about that. And where you can just simply, and also save for goals, where you can put in like a safe goal, where you say you want to buy a new phone in X amount of days or month, and you can put like $10 aside every month for exactly that goal, and it makes it much easier and also gamifies the whole thing a little bit with more where you have more motivation behind of saving and maybe doing the right thing.
Well, and can I also add to that if you do things in that way...
You can't add it. Stop adding it.
If you do things in that way, it's much more gratifying to get the things that you actually want instead of the things that you need. Because, like, for example, when I bought my first car, I didn't ever... Like, my parents are not the parents who were just going to buy me a car because they wanted me to earn that. You have to work for it, and you have to, that's how it works. And I'm so glad that they did that, because I didn't have my first car until I was 25. And
loser.
Yeah. But I worked really hard to save for that car, and I ended up getting like my dream car. Granted, I only had it for a year because somebody was like, no, move to Austria, come live with me.
And I said, take your car with you.
How?
Just take it apart and go.
The funny thing is, I loved my car so much that I actually looked into what it would cost to ship it here, because I loved that car so much. It was like my baby. But yeah, but it was so much more gratifying than I was like, I'm so glad I didn't just get a car when I was 18, like as a gift or something for my parents, because I appreciated my car so much more when I earned it. And I think that's even with little things, just like getting a new phone or, whatever it might be. Even the little things.
Let's take a quick break.
Okay.
We're back. But I think you make a really good point by paying for yourself for certain things and for saving your own money for certain things is much more gratifying and makes it much more rewarding in a way. And I think also, the way you grew up, seeing your parents spend money, and the way you grew up getting taught about money and how you maybe save or spend money has a big influence how you basically act with money.
Yeah.
And I read an interesting article the other day that in the kids nowadays, it's almost becoming like a thing. What are they calling it? Like living in debt, basically, where they take out consumer loans just to have like new phones, the hippest clothes and stuff like that, and they're going into debt pretty fast just for that stuff. And it's becoming a hip thing because society, especially like social media and stuff, shows us those things, like those what are they called, items, those what is the word I'm looking for?
I don't know.
Not minority items, like high-end items. Those really fancy things. You want to have the newest shoes. You want to have that brand. You want to have those glasses. You stuff like that. And things are expensive. And when I think back, I didn't have a bank account for I don't know how long. I was pretty. I don't know. I was 17 or 18 when I got a bank account.
I was 16, I think.
And spending money before that with cash, you always have like an overview, how much you spend, how much you have. But with a card, it's much easier to go into that because,
Yep.
They don't tell you not to spend money because you have to pay them back eventually anyway. So,
well, and in the US, it's even more of a problem because of the credit score stuff. And
I mean, it's here too.
Yeah, but you don't automatically have a credit score. So like when you're like even trying, not in the US, you start at 0. And unless you have a credit card or some sort of debt, your credit score stays at 0.
Yeah.
And so when you're trying to get a student loan, if you've never had a credit card before you go to college, which most people don't, then it's really hard to get a student loan where you have a good interest rate because they're like, oh, your credit score is not high enough to get a good interest rate.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a messed up system anyways. They're basically setting you up for failure. But
I mean, a lot of people have debt. Even with maybe because of student loans or maybe because they bought like a house or something or of medical reasons. And so it's a common thing. But I think especially if you're in a relationship, and that's a point I wanted to make, is that you should talk about it. You should be open about it. And especially if you don't have co-joint accounts or like one account where you both have transparency and see what's in there, what's going on, you should talk at least once or twice a month about finances and see, okay, where are we standing right now?
At least once.
And just be open about it because that can also avoid future problems, fights, maybe even.
But that's also not to say that it's easy to talk. I mean, we never talk about it. I would not never, but it's rare that we have that conversation about finances. And that's something that I want to get better at doing. But I mean, it's not easy to talk about. I almost, and I think a lot of people get this way, but I almost get emotional when I talk about finance stuff because it's uncomfortable. It's not because I'm sad or I'm upset. I'm just uncomfortable. And sometimes when I'm that uncomfortable, I get like teary-eyed and I'm just, it's stressful.
Yeah.
And I think that it's definitely not an easy conversation, but it also doesn't have to lead to an argument, which a lot of times it does. And a lot of couples have issues based around money and finances because they don't know how to talk about
financial therapist as well. I mean, you can also go to a couples therapist and talk about her with that, but with them. But there is also a financial therapist who is specialized on that stuff. I think it's not the worst idea to, if you can't do it because of whatever reason, you should maybe see a professional and see where you can get more comfortable with that topic. Because it's important. I think it prevents a lot of stuff, especially if you maybe don't know like that your partner has huge amount of debt or maybe like a shopping addiction where they shop expensive stuff all the time and you have no clue that they're like, dooming themselves by doing that. So yeah, it's not the worst idea. And
it gets less uncomfortable the more you talk about it. People say that when you talk about it once a month, the first few times are going to be really, really uncomfortable. But the more you do it, the less uncomfortable it gets because also the more you do it, the more you feel like you're on the same page with your partner, the more you feel like, okay, I know where we are and I know where we stand. My partner understands like my spending habits. I understand their spending habits. They understand what I make each month and how I feel about what I make each month, if I feel stable, blah, 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 all of that.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to marriage and stuff like that, there are also more aspects to the whole thing because, with debt and with money problems, that can fall back to you pretty fast. And there are ways for both of you guys, basically, I don't want to say like the word prenup is a little, triggering for some people, but I think there are ways to have like an attorney look over like, and maybe you sign something, both parties sign something where you're both in safe space if for whatever reason the marriage ends.
And it's not, I think there's a fine line, and it's weird, my dad and I were actually talking about something similar the other day, but there's a fine line between just looking out for yourself but also looking out for your partner and vice versa. And there's also a line of, okay, do I even trust this person? And you don't want to cross that line of making them not feel like they're not trusted or you're not trusted or whatever by saying we have to sign this, we have to sign this, we have to sign that, like 10 million things of conditions basically. But in terms of finances, I think if you are going into a marriage and you have a lot of debt and your partner doesn't want to take over any of that debt should things not happen or should things not work out, then why not sign something? Because it's, I don't know, I don't see any issues with that. And if you care about them, then
right,
you're not, it's not a jinx. A lot of people say, well, it's a jinx, that means we're going to get divorced, and it doesn't.
It's bullshit. I think it's just a safety measure for both parties. You don't want to get dragged into something, and nor wants the other person to get dragged into something. And that's it, because you have a lot of shit already when you get divorced. So you don't want to deal with more stuff. And if you set up something where you're still peaceful and where you can talk with each other in a normal matter, then I think that's the best thing to do.
Well, and if you really think about it, I mean, marriage itself, and I'm not putting it down because I love being married, but marriage itself is a contract. You're signing a contract anyways to get married. You can be just as in love with somebody and not be married, and hate somebody and be married. You know, marriage does not mean anything in terms of it's on paper. It's just, this is what this is. We both signed it. We're legally joined as a couple in like the eye of the law or whatever. But so if you think about that, if you're
eye of the law, that sounds so official.
I know, but if you're
eye of the law, it looks at you because it's the eye of the law. Don't steal. The eye of the law. It looks at you all the time. Don't watch porn. The eye of the law. And if you do use a VPN, the eye of the law.
So you're giving out tips now.
Yeah.
How to watch porn safely. Do not be watched by eye of the porn.
How to watch porn without your wife knowing that you're watching porn.
How to watch porn.
She'll never find it in your history.
How to watch porn without the eye of the law looking at you.
I don't remember what I was saying, but anyways.
Sorry. You have to laugh.
But what I was saying is that if you're so like weird about signing a prenup or something in terms of like the finances and things, technically you're already doing that by signing a marriage license.
Yeah.
So they're both legal documents.
Yeah.
So quite honestly, I don't know. That's just my opinion, obviously. And I'm not saying that marriage isn't lovely and wonderful, because it is. I don't see marriage as the piece of paper, you know, that's the legal part. I see marriage as the love and the couples, you know, that's what that means to me.
And the reality is that there are a lot of fights because they're divorce attorneys. The reality is that there are a lot of fights about money and about who gets what. And it's just a shit show. And to be honest, nobody wants to go through that. And I think with stuff like that, you can prevent that. And it's just a healthy way to, at some point, maybe when you part ways, say, okay, look, this is how we did it, and this is the fair way. A point. And you can't make it 100% fair for anyone anyways, you know. There are sacrifices, and someone has to take more sacrifices probably, but it's just how life works. So, yeah.
But yeah, we're not trying to say that you're going to fail as a couple because of finances. No, that's not at all what we're saying. Yep. But we think it's important to talk about it. Wolfgang and I are going to try to talk more about it and be more aware of, you know, actually sitting down and taking the time to discuss certain things once in a while.
Yep.
And just remember that it is uncomfortable, but it's not like it's not uncomfortable it's not like it's comfortable for anyone in the beginning. It's always going to be uncomfortable in the beginning. But just like with everything over time, it will become more comfortable and it will become more easy to talk about. And it's important.
Yep.
So
with that, thanks for listening. And we hear each other next week.
Yes.
Goodbye.